Okay, so I want to keep going with this. We have our function in place up at the top, and now we're going to start working on main and coordinating it with that function that we've already created. Let's take a look at the instructions again. So, okay, so we're at this step here. In main, create variables as follows. You know what? I think I'm just going to copy this and save some time, and then we'll talk about some of these variables before we continue. So we have the number of students. You know, I think, let me see if I have some sample output here that we can take a look at. Yeah, looking at the sample output, this is what main is going to look like after we run this. We're going to get the number of students in the class, between 1 and 24 students, and if the user enters a number outside of that range, 1 to 24, we're going to come right back at them. So we'll have like an input validation loop there. So then once we have a good number of students, we're going to have a loop to basically have the data entry or the input for each of those students. Enter midterm grade for student 1, enter final grade for student 1, enter it for student 2, enter it for student 3. So that's a loop there. So we have an input validation loop here dealing with this part, and then another loop to loop through and get the data entry from the user. And then once the numbers are entered, the scores, the exam scores, then we're pretty much home free. We're going to use our function to determine the letter grade based on the average. You saw us write that code in the previous video. And then we'll produce like a little report at the end based on what we get back from the function, the number of A's, the number of B's, and so on. So we'll look at that, probably not in this video, but definitely one of the later ones. So getting back to these instructions here, so I'll just talk about some of these variables here. So the number of students in the class, the midterm and the final is entered by the teacher. Okay, notice this is not the same as mid and fin parameter. I mean, they're referring to the same thing, a midterm and a final, but we've got two sets of variables. These belong to main, and mid and fin are parameters that belong to the function. So let's not confuse those two, even though they are describing the same phenomena, the midterm grade and the final grade. And then we have a letter grade, which we're calling L grade here in main. And then we have, these are what I'll call the tally variables, the number of A's, the number of B's, the number of C's, and so on, that we'll use to tally up those values later. Okay, so let's go back to our instructions here. We're going to get the number of students from the user, and we're going to use a while loop to handle that input and make sure they're entering a number between 1 and 24. I think, we probably all know that we need at least this much. Here, I'm going to, okay, this would allow us to get the number of students from the user, and that's going to go into the num students variable that you see here. But we're told to validate that, and so we really just need to wrap this in a while loop. Here we can say while the number of students is less than 1, or the number of students is greater than 24 if they're outside of that range. Our OR operator, the double pipes there. If that's the case, we're going to just come right back at them. So if you just sandwich the input in a loop like that, that's going to work. It's going to run the first time because we have num students as 0. While num students is less than 1, well, 0 is less than 1. So the program is going to go right into this loop, and whatever the user enters, it'll be checked again on the next iteration. And if it's still outside of that range, then they'll just be asked again. They're going to keep being asked over and over again until they get it right. And I'm going to say, just a reminder, do not put a semicolon there. No, that is a syntax problem. You're going to get some really weird results. Yeah, it'll be a clean compile. The compiler's not going to have a problem with that, but you get some very strange results there. So no semicolon at that point. Let me see how I'm looking on time. Okay, so I'm at 5 minutes now. I'll go a little bit more, and then then I'll move to another video. Okay, so we have our loop to get the number of students, the correct number of students. And once the user enters the appropriate number of students, we're going to write a separate for loop to run that many times, that number of students. So this is pretty easy. We will create a for loop. Okay, and I'll throw down a sandwich there. Again, no semicolon right there. No, no, no. So don't do that. But we do have our loop header here. So I have a loop counter I, little I for integer. I'm going to start counting at 1. I'm going to keep going while I is less than or equal to the number of students as entered by the teacher. So this will, the loop will ask the user for the midterm and the final grade for only the number of students that are in the class. Or if there are 10 students in the class, the loop will run 10 times. If there are 2 students in the class, it'll only run 2 times, and so on. So nice setup here. And so inside, let me point out this output here. Look at this, enter midterm grade for student 1, enter midterm grade for student 2. It looks like our loop variable is in play here to get that student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4. So let me paste some code in here. Okay, that's our loop variable, little I. Enter midterm grade for student I. First time through the loop, I has 1, so we can see student 1. Second time through the loop, I has a value of 2, so we see student 2, and so on. So that's how you're able to reproduce that effect, using your loop counter in your output like that. So the user knows which student they're entering the data for. So I think I'm going to stop this video here, and then in the next video we'll talk about calling the function and tallying those values, the ABCs and so on returned from the function.